The air over the Norwegian Sea tasted like steel and ice. Below them, the water was a restless, slate-gray sheet, chewing at the white foam of its own fury. Leading the tight formation of 3 Republic P-47 Thunderbolts was Lieutenant Jack Deacon Harris. At 24, he was the old man of the squadron, his face etched with a permanent calm that was the envy and comfort of every pilot who flew beside him. His focus was absolute, his gloved hands gentle on the stick. Today's job was deep-sea escort, protecting a patrol bomber hunting U-boats off the coast of occupied Norway. Flying his left wing was Captain Silas Grim Reed, an ace with 10 confirmed kills and eyes that had seen too much sky turn black with smoke. Silas didn't talk much. His presence was a heavy, reassuring anchor. Before climbing into the cockpit, he'd pulled a tattered black-and-white photograph from his breast pocket, a fleeting moment with a woman named Eleanor, and tucked it back away. He flew with a cold, almost mechanical precision. The third plane, holding position on the right, belonged to Ensign Ben "Rookie" Miller. He was barely out of flight school, all nerves and enthusiasm. Ben had a tiny, faded teddy bear mascot, zip-tied to his control column, a gift from his younger sister back on the farm in Iowa. He kept fiddling with his oxygen mask, adjusting to the oppressive cold, determined not to let the 2 veterans see him sweat. "Deacon DeGrim Rookie," Jack's voice was crisp in their headsets. "1 hour to turn point. Keep a sharp eye on the deck. Sun's a liar out here." "Copy that, Deacon. Beautiful morning for a fight," Grim replied, his tone devoid of irony. "Roger, sir," Rookie chirped, perhaps a little too loudly. They flew on, 3 tiny specks of American resolve suspended over hostile, empty expanse. The radio chatter from the distant bomber faded to static, and the 3 pilots were alone. The only sound, the deep, comforting roar of their massive Pratt & Whitney engines. Then everything changed. It didn't start with a bang or a tracer round. It started with the silence of the sea below them, giving way to an unnatural, shimmering brightness. The sun, already low and weak, was suddenly amplified by a strange phenomenon, a monstrous, crystalline cloud bank that rose from the horizon like a sheer white wall, reflecting the light in blinding sheets. "What in God's name is that?" Grim demanded, his calm finally shattered. "It's a squall line, but it's solid," Deacon muttered. "Rookie, throttle back, hold formation. We're gonna cut under it." As Deacon backed sharply, an insidious cold enveloped them, a temperature drop so severe it hit like a physical blow. Ice began to lace across their canopies. The visibility vanished in a matter of seconds. They flew into an opaque world of white, utterly disoriented. "Deacon, my S-speed's jumping. I can't see Grim." Rookie's voice was high-pitched, laced with panic. "Hold your attitude, Rookie. Trust your gauges," Jack yelled back, his altimeter spinning wildly. He felt his plane shudder, not from enemy fire, but from the incredible atmospheric turmoil. He fought the controls, trying to hold the Thunderbolts steady, to keep the 3-ship formation from colliding in the freezing, sightless void. A split second later, a new noise assaulted his ears, a terrifying, deep crack like a glacier splitting, followed by an agonizing shriek of tearing metal and a sudden, violent lurch from his right. "Rookie, report!" Deacon screamed into his mask. Only static answered. "Grim! Grim, where are you?" There was a final chilling transmission. Not a full sentence, just a clipped, gasping whisper from Silas Reed's radio, a sound swallowed quickly by the growing roar of the storm and the freezing white darkness. "The ice! It's—" And then nothing. The radios fell silent, consumed by the howl of the wind and the freezing white darkness. The 3 planes and the 3 men simply vanished from the sky, taking their last desperate moments with them. The search teams that flew the next day found nothing. No oil slick, no debris, no bodies. The storm had passed, leaving behind a deceptively calm sea. The official report was filed 6 weeks later. Missing in action, presumed lost at sea. They were written off as another tragic, forgotten consequence of the war. This is where the story truly begins. Let's introduce the modern-day protagonist and the shocking discovery. Dr. Alara Jensen, an aviation archaeologist with the stoic resilience of her Norwegian heritage, traced the contour lines of the Svartdalen Glacier on her tablet. The name, which translated to Black Valley, was a grim joke today. The valley was blindingly white, yet the glacier itself was dying. A brutal summer melt, coupled with an unusually warm autumn, had pulled back the centuries-old ice like a shroud. For 3 weeks, Alara and her small team had been hunting for a mythological Viking ship, rumored to be in the valley's bedrock. They found nothing of the ship, but then came the anomaly. On a late Tuesday afternoon, the ground-penetrating radar operator, a nervous young man named Lucas, called her over. His face was pale beneath his protective goggles. He said, "Dr. Jensen, we have structure. At 12 meters, 3 actually, and they're large. They're too large for Viking." Alara didn't hesitate. She ordered a controlled and gentle melt using heated steam wands, peeling back the layers of compressed snow and ancient ice. It took 36 hours of painstaking work, and when the final layer of milky, opaque ice fractured and fell away, Alara stood at the edge of a deep, crystalline pit and stared down at the impossible. Lucas was right. There were 3 large structures, perfectly preserved, encased in a bowl of ice the color of turquoise glass. They weren't a Viking ship. They were 3 P-47 Thunderbolts. The planes lay in a gentle 3-point attitude, as if they had landed on snow and then been perfectly frozen in their tracks. They were ranged in almost perfect close formation. Deacon's P-47 slightly ahead, Grimm's on the left wingtip, Rookie's on the right. The preservation was otherworldly. The olive drab paint was vibrant. The white star and bar insignia on the wings looked freshly applied. And the tail numbers, A34, A35, and A36, were clearly legible. There was no charring, no shrapnel damage, no crumpled metal typical of a violent crash. It was as if a giant hand had reached down, placed the fighters gently on the ground, and then froze time around them. 75 years, Alara whispered, the condensation of her breath turning instantly to ice crystals. 75 years of silence, and here they are. Alara and a veteran recovery specialist, Ole, rappelled into the pit. The air within the ice chamber was stale, impossibly cold, and carried a faint, nostalgic scent of aviation fuel and old leather. Ole carefully scraped the ice from the first canopy, A34, Deacon's plane. He used a small heater to trace the outline of the plexiglass, which cracked and popped with the temperature change. Alara held her breath. Through the cleared glass, she saw him, Lieutenant Jack Deacon Harris, still in his seat. He was slumped slightly forward, held in place by his harness, his leather helmet still on his head. His flight suit was stiff with cold, and his goggles were pushed up over his brow. His gloved hand rested on the control stick, his fingers curled around the grip. He was a perfect frozen ghost. Alara's own personal quest had been to bring these men home, but seeing them like this, not scattered wreckage, not bones in the sea, but whole, staring out at a world that had moved on without them, was profoundly unsettling. She moved to the next plane, 835, Grimm. The pilot was rigid, his head tilted back against the armored seat. But his hand was not on the stick. It was pressed to the center of his chest. The third plane, A-36, was the most disturbing. Ensign Ben Miller was slumped to the side. His mask was askew, and one of his hands was holding a tiny dark object, the little teddy bear mascot, clutched against his flight suit. Laura placed her palm against the freezing metal fuselage of Deacon's plane. The mystery wasn't where they went. It was how they got here, and why three highly disciplined fighter pilots, who had obviously attempted a synchronized landing, would just sit in their cockpits and never attempt to get out. They didn't crash, Ole, Alora stated, her voice echoing off the ice walls. They landed. They stopped their planes. They just never left. The stage was set for the investigation into the crucial final minutes of the pilots' lives. This is the crucial final part where the decades-old mystery is solved, revealing the tragic truth hidden within the ice. The recovery operation became a highly sensitive archaeological dig. The surrounding ice bowl was a perfect time capsule, preserving the planes in detail, far exceeding any sunken wreck. Ilara and her team worked with a specialized military forensics unit. Their initial, chilling task was to carefully remove the three pilots. The men, who had vanished in the blink of an eye 75 years prior, were finally given the reverence of a proper exit. With the cockpits empty, the investigation shifted to the instrument panels and personal effects, the true data recorders. Clue 1, the throttle quadrants. In all three planes, the throttle levers were set to idle. The mixture control handles were set to cutoff. This confirmed Ilara's hunch. The pilots hadn't violently crashed. They had performed a meticulous, coordinated power-off belly landing. Their final act was one of supreme discipline, ensuring the planes were stabilized and the engines shut down exactly as protocol demanded for an emergency descent on a hostile field. Clue 2, Ensign Miller's compass. Ben, rookie Miller's compass, was not centered on the direction of their return flight. It was locked on a due south bearing, a complete 90 degrees deviation from their intended route. This suggested that in the whiteout, Deacon had ordered them to turn away from the turbulent sea and fly inland, chasing the faint, possible hope of a clear landing area in the mountains. Clue 3, the radio frequency. Lieutenant Harris's radio set was not tuned to the standard military band. It was set to a near-obsolete emergency mountain frequency, an old, rarely used channel. He had been trying to contact any ground station that might give them weather updates or guidance in the storm. The last few desperate attempts were logged in a tiny, frosted notepad wedged into his dash. The most important clue was found pressed against the chest of Captain Silas Grim Reed. When the medical examiner carefully removed the preserved leather of his flight jacket, they found a torn page of a field journal, crumpled and saturated with frozen moisture. The words were written in a hurried, shaky hand, clearly the last entry of a dying man. Storm came too fast. Visibility 0. Deacon says stay tight. Rookie's scared. We turned south, chasing a break. Landed clean, a miracle. No gear down, perfect glide. Stopped in a field of snow, deep and quiet. We're out of fuel. Radio's dead on arrival. Deacon says wait for the ice to stop. But it's not ice. It's snow. Tons of it. The sound like a train. An avalanche came down right behind us,
trapped. We can't open the canopies. They're locked. It's too tight. The air is going stale. Deacon is trying to save Rookie. Grim A35. The final sentence, written with agonizing pressure from a frozen pencil, provided the devastating answer. The chilling whisper Ilara heard 75 years ago was the ice. It was Grim trying to warn his commander of the oncoming white wave of snow and ice. The 3 pilots, relying on their exceptional training, had successfully executed a coordinated emergency landing in the only patch of still air they could find. But the sudden, violent snow squall that had knocked them out of the sky had culminated in a fast, colossal snowdrift or a localized avalanche. The event was so immediate and the packed snow and ice so dense that it locked their canopies, turning their intact aircraft into 3 airtight coffins. They hadn't died in a violent crash. They had died of asphyxiation and exposure, trapped by the very discipline that saved their planes. They were buried alive, their final moments spent struggling against the silence of the snow, their aircraft a tomb of ice. The story of the ice ghosts finally gave the war effort a name and a face to the missing. Ilara and her team ensured that the 3 Thunderbolts were meticulously documented and moved piece by frozen piece down the mountain. 3 small private ceremonies were held the following year. Lieutenant Jack Deacon Harris, Captain Silas Grim Reed, and Ensign Ben Rookie Miller were finally laid to rest with full military honors 76 years overdue. Ilara Jensen stood by the coffins, one of which contained the tiny frozen teddy bear recovered from the hand of Ben Miller. She looked up at the vast, uncaring sky, knowing that the story wasn't one of a mysterious vanishing, but of the ultimate brotherhood. 3 pilots who flew together, landed together, and remained in formation, preserved by a cruel twist of fate, until they could finally be brought home. The news of the discovery, the 3 intact P-47s emerging from the melting ice, was a sensation. But for the 3 families who had lived with a ghost in their lineage, it was an earthquake. For Elsie Miller, who was 9 when her older brother Ben Rookie vanished, the news was overwhelming. Elsie was now 84 and frail, living in the same Iowa farmhouse she and Ben had grown up in. Her sister-in-law, a distant relative of Deacon Harris, was the one who called. Ilara Jensen arranged a video conference, wanting to gently prepare Elsie for the sight of her brother's remains. Instead, Elsie just wanted to know about the plane. "Did you find his bear, Doctor?" Elsie asked, her voice thin but steady. "The little brown one I gave him, I crocheted it myself." When Ilara confirmed they had found the tiny, faded mascot clutched in his hand, Elsie simply nodded, tears tracking paths down her wrinkled cheeks. He always kept his promises. He promised he'd never fly without his luck. The object, insignificant to history, was everything to her.
It was the confirmation that in his final, terrifying moments, her brother had still been Ben. The recovery team found 2 items on Captain Silas Grim Reed that spoke volumes about his private life, the life he'd put on hold for the war. One was the black and white photograph of the woman, Eleanor, which was stiff but readable. The second was the logbook page detailing the avalanche, the story of his disciplined death. Silas never married. Eleanor, a nurse he had met briefly during training, had mourned him and, years later, married a returning veteran, raising a family in California. She was now deceased. But she had a son, Michael, born in 1947, who grew up knowing his mother's first love had been lost in the war. When Michael received the page and the photo, he understood the sacrifice. "He wrote that for us, didn't he?" Michael asked Ilara over the phone. "He knew he was dying, and his last act was to write down the truth, to make sure they weren't just a riddle." Silas Reed's final log entry wasn't just a record of failure. It was a final, cold transmission of the truth. A desperate last act of duty meant to cut through the bureaucratic silence of missing in action. Lieutenant Jack Deacon Harris had no immediate survivors. His fiancée, whom he was due to marry upon his return, had died decades ago. His legacy was inherited by his great-nephew, Colonel Marcus Harris, a current fighter pilot stationed in Europe. Marcus flew to the glacier himself to witness the final extraction. He stood in the sterile hangar where the 3 P-47s were being painstakingly disassembled for conservation. He walked up to his great-uncle's machine, A-34. Ilara pointed to the instrument panel. "We found this. The emergency frequency you read about in the report? He'd kept trying to radio out, even after the engines were dead. He thought until the very end he could find a way out for his wingmen." Marcus, a man who had faced his own dangers in modern air combat, simply rested his hand on the cold aluminum of the cockpit sill. He didn't see a tragic victim of war. He saw a leader who didn't break formation, even on the ground. "He was trying to save Rookie," he murmured, reciting the line from Grimm's journal page. "He was the first in, the last to quit. That's what matters." The 3 pilots were finally buried side by side in a national cemetery, overlooking the sea they had sworn to protect, their headstones marking the date of their death, October 15th, 1944. Elsie Miller placed the worn little teddy bear upon the casket of her brother. Michael Reed stood stiffly as his mother's first love was interred, and Colonel Marcus Harris, in his modern flight uniform, delivered a final, unwavering salute. The ice had held the secret for 75 years, preserving not just 3 planes, but a precise moment of courage, brotherhood, and a profound, silent tragedy. The ice ghosts were finally home, their duty done, their stories no longer lost to the sky.